had just come back from his studies, Princeton, taking a trip to Europe and doing some extended studies there. Wife was with him. He was called to teach here in Pittsburgh at Western Theological Seminary. Interesting, neat little story about him. Apparently, he had a wagon load of books that he had purchased from Europe, and he was bringing them through Pittsburgh. A riot broke out, and the books were gone, never to be found again. Kind of a neat little story, but yeah, he taught at Western. In 1880, he gave his inaugural address. He was in the New Testament department at that time. Actually wrote, I think maybe it was the first book on textual criticism published in America, or at least published by an American theologian or an American New Testament studies guy. And gave that inaugural lecture on inspiration. So it sort of set the stage for what was to come. Interestingly, even before this, when he was called to Dayton, Ohio to be a stated supply there, Brad Gundlach told me that in his research, he found out that Warfield's first sermon was on the inspiration of Scripture.
Really?
As a theological student, yeah.
Huh.
Which incidentally, Brad is writing what I think is going to be the biography on Warfield. And if you've read anything by him on Warfield, it's just excellent stuff. So I hope that comes out sometime in my lifetime. If Brad's listening, maybe he can take that nudge. But in 1880, he gave his inaugural lecture, and he obviously went to Princeton, and he was friends with the professors there and so on. During that time, in 1880, Charles Briggs, who was in Union in New York, was trying to get a journal started, and he actually tried to get that journal started with Scotland, and it didn't fly. So he wrote to Princeton and tried to get an article started, or a journal started with them, and they took him up on that. Well, one issue appeared, and in that one issue, he wrote a historical brief about what was going on with the heresy trial over in Scotland regarding Scripture, and an Old Testament professor over there by the name of Robertson Smith. And A.A. Hodge took issue with that. They had personal correspondence, and that produced a series of articles, the very first of which is the article that Hodge and Warfield wrote on inspiration, which has become quite famous now. But Hodge enlisted his old student and friend, Warfield, in that endeavor because of his apologetic expertise. So kind of an interesting thing when you think about Warfield. He's sort of a Renaissance man. He's a scientist, or at least he has deep interests in science. He's a New Testament studies guy, and yet he has deep apologetic interests. He also becomes, within about a decade, he takes A.A. Hodge's place as systematic theologian. So he's kind of a man of all seasons in regard to disciplines.